Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Kidney Coach YouTube channel. I am naturopath Fiona Chin, co-founder of Kidney Coach, and Kaigenesis, a range of supplements designed for those diagnosed with chronic kidney disease wanting to reduce their creatinine and bump up their eGFR. And I'm joined again today by the wonderful, amazing Jessianna Saville. Jessie is a renal dietitian. She is the CEO, head of Kidney Nutritional Institute. She leads a team of amazing renal dietitians there that do all things renal related dietary stuff. But what I really love about Jessianna and her team is they're really big on treating the cause and not the symptoms, treating the person, not the disease. And if you are lucky enough to consult with Jessianna or any of her team, you'll know that she's likely to put you through a genetic test or nutrigenomics or checking organic acids and all of those microbiome things and actually digging into what's going on with kidney disease. So I have a lot of respect for Jessianna and her team. And we've been doing a series on amino acids and protein and chronic kidney disease. And today we're talking about tyrosine. So Jessianna, welcome back again. We had a really interesting brain pick before we record on this. So I'll hand it over to you, tyrosine.
Okay, I'm hoping my okay. Is my audio okay?
It just, it's been great the whole time we've been talking, and it's just crackled up and you've slowed down. Your screen has slowed down there, and I've got a bit of feedback from me.
Okay, hold on one second.
Okay.
Bill has to edit this part out. Okay, I think it's working now.
We're good.
Okay, so all right, so let's go ahead and talk. We're talking about L-tyrosine, one of the amino acids. This amino acid is probably one of my most favorite amino acids that I'm most interested in because it impacts me personally quite a bit because it drives into dopamine, which is something that's really interesting to me because I tend to be just a little bit ADD. It runs in my family. When I've done my own nutrigenomics, I have like 3 SNPs for dopamine, and it's really helped me understand my behavior and how my brain works a lot. So I'm really interested in this and how it drives back to kidney disease. So L-tyrosine is one of the amino acids. It's used in a lot of different places, typically in the kidney world. If you're reading a lot of research about amino acids, plant-based diets, you'll see L-tyrosine come up because they'll talk about it being converted into paracresol, which is a uremic toxin. And so a lot of times L-tyrosine kind of gets the like, oh, it's not good, decrease your intake of it. L-tyrosine's in a lot of animal-based foods in particular. And so you'll hear a lot of negative talk about tyrosine with CKD. However, what I hope we unpack today is that it may not be exactly what we think with L-tyrosine. And L-tyrosine, I do think, can be a really, really helpful amino acid for people with kidney disease.
Yeah, such a fascinating. When we were talking before we hit record, I obviously think a lot about L-tyrosine in Parkinson's when I'm working with that being the precursor to dopamine and everything that you said. So let's start off. What would be some of the deficient symptoms if someone, and then hook it back to, I also want you to talk about the nutrigenomics that we were talking about as well, which I find very interesting what you see in your clinical practice. But if you've got someone coming in and you're thinking, I need to look into tyrosine, maybe there's a deficiency, what are typically some of the things that will pop up for you with the patient presented in front of you?
So when we have a patient come in, we're doing an assessment. Some people think dietitians are just kind of looking at, what foods do they eat and, how many calories, what's their weight, what's their protein. But that is like kind of just very fundamental pieces that, yes, we look at. It's not the most important. When I have a patient come in and the first 5 to 10 minutes, I'm kind of learning about them as a person, what they like, kind of trying to understand their personality. I immediately start gathering clinical evidence just from that conversation on what we might need to be looking at. And what I mean by that, especially when we're looking at tyrosine, is I start wondering a little bit about how this person is driven by dopamine. Now, dopamine is I call it the happy chemical. It's what is the reward neurotransmitter in our brain. So when we do something, our brain will, produce a little bit of dopamine, right? People call it a dopamine hit.
Mhm.
And that makes our body say, oh, this feels good. You want to do it again. It can be an underlying, part of addiction because certain very addictive behaviors drive dopamine, like pornography and drugs and etc. Um, so so it's this happy hormone. However, dopamine also can be very positive. Sometimes we think about it as negative, but it can be very positive for people. People that need dopamine in their body, sometimes they just like process it really quickly. They're just wired to process it. So they eat up all their dopamine stores really quick, and then their brain is just like looking for dopamine. These people can be high achievers a lot of times. And as I'm listening to them, I'll pick up on cues like they're very successful in their career. They like getting their, like they like getting the deal done. They really like aiming for their workout and they have like good workout goals and they have goals and they hit the goals. And as you start just listening to the personality, you're like, I am pretty sure, or they're the like big personalities, right? They love to ski and they love to surf and they love like they just have these like they live a big life, right? And they're just a full life and they love to do things. And a lot of times I can almost immediately say, this person really, I need to be thinking about dopamine and L-tyrosine within the context of their whole case. Almost inevitably, these same type of people, and I am also one of those people, so maybe that's why I'm especially acutely aware. Um, but these people, I also see that if there's a blood pressure dysregulation, it seems to take a lot of interventions to get the blood pressure under control. Unless already they're like even then, right? I was going to say, unless they're like super active and already come back salt, but even then, all people that are really active, they're very fit, they've already cut back on salt, we've added in a bunch of potassium, and they still just are like really struggling with their blood pressure. And then if we run nutrigenomics on them, I'll be like, whoa, like this is potentially a dopamine issue, which we can talk about. Dopamine ties into blood pressure in just a second. This is potentially a dopamine issue. So back to your original question, one of the things is that if I see from the beginning that somebody potentially needs dopamine, like they either run through it or they don't convert it well, or somehow dopamine is part of their story, I put that as a high priority to think about how we're going to formulate their nutrition. It changes a lot with how we set up their nutrition plans. Those type of people either need a lot of structure, so there's less decisions, or they need to be able to have a lot of flexibility. It's like the extremes, right? A lot of flexibility to be able to experiment because that's very exciting for them. And
Mm.
so it just plays into so many different parts of the case, but especially for me in thinking how we make an effective strategy for blood pressure control.
I just love that you are so, and it, probably like you say, because it's so relatable to you, but how amazing that is and how you tailor an individual treatment protocol for someone based on how they're going to process the dopamine. Like talk about individualized medicine. Like I think that's just brilliant that you are so on the ball with that. So you started to talk about it. So tell me how this ties into blood pressure control and then feed that into kidneys, because it was really interesting. One of the things that I did not know, and you mentioned this before we hit record, that there are dopamine receptors inside the kidney. So talk to me about that and blood pressure and then kidney health.
Okay. Um, so again, when we had kind of this light bulb moment about 3 years ago in our practice, because we were doing nutrigenomics, where you can look at people's SNPs, how they're processing, different things. And I just noticed again and again that we would have people consistently with this DRD1, DRD2 SNP, which relates back to dopamine processing. And what we've done with genetics is like pretty much for every SNP, we go to Google Scholar, and we're like, hey, DRD1 and CKD, DRD2 and CKD. Those are the name of the SNPs, DRD1, DRD2. And I was like, oh, holy smokes, there is a connection to dopamine and the kidneys. Like, I think it's DRD2. I should have looked it up right before
No, you're right. It's DRD2. Yeah.
It's DRD2. Okay, so I was like, we have dopamine receptors in the kidneys. What would be like the physiological function? Because in my mind, I was just thinking, oh, it's the happy hormone. Like, why do we need a happy hormone in our kidneys? But if you go look at some of the, you have to remember that dopamine, while it is this neurotransmitter in your brain, it also helps regulate other processes because it's a neurotransmitter. It's not just a hormone. I misspoke that. It's a neurotransmitter, which means it's involved with the nerve system. Guess what is very important in our kidneys in regulating or why the nervous system needs to be involved is with blood pressure because your nervous system is really tied into your vascular system, right? Because if you have vascular expansion or contraction, how is your body going to feel that unless it's attached to nerves, right? Your body has to have some way to be able to say, hey, these blood vessels have opened. Oh, these blood vessels have closed. That would be a censorship through the nervous system. So we started thinking about dopamine, why would it be in the kidneys and how does this link back to our patients on like what we're going to do with this information? And there's two really huge pieces for me. Is one, I started looking at blood pressure differently. So dopamine, and I got to put my notes on this. So dopamine, interestingly enough, it helps promote the excretion of sodium from in your urine, right?
Hmm.
And it inhibits sodium reabsorption in the proximal tubule. And this is dopamine in particular. So these two things, excretion of sodium, sodium reabsorption, it also regulates renal blood flow, right? Expansion and contraction, which would make sense, right? Because this is like how the blood vessels are going to expand and contract. So it makes sense that actually that dopamine would be in those places, and it's really acutely tied to blood pressure because this excretion of sodium and this sodium reabsorption is very, very, very closely tied to how people are going to do with their blood pressure. So, kind of going back to practical basis, if I had patients that I could tell were driven by dopamine or they needed dopamine or that was, just an important part of how their body functioned and their blood pressure was tricky, that's a patient where we would talk about stress as a huge priority topic because stress really can drive down the dopamine process. But also, it's another patient that I would be very, very careful and thoughtful about putting on a very vegan plant-based diet because those tend to be a little bit more deficient in tyrosine. And B6. You have to have both of these B6 to help convert tyrosine to L-DOPA, which, is dopamine in your system. So for these patients and their kidney function with dopamine, I say, oh, like stress could be a driver of their kidney decline, right? Like just that piece. Stress could be a cause of their kidney decline, not just because blood pressure goes up, but because of how it links back into these dopamine receptors. So that would be one underlying cause that we think about addressing. Number two, if we're struggling with blood pressure, which is going to cause nephron damage over time, glomerular damage, I would also want to be very cognizant of dopamine and making sure we have enough so that all these sodium excretion is going to run really well. And that would be linked, back to L-tyrosine. Do we have enough L-tyrosine to support what these people need genetically? So those would be like two big pieces that I would be looking at with dopamine and L-tyrosine, the precursor to dopamine, for people with CKD.
Yeah, and then also talk to me about oxidative stress and dopamine and L-tyrosine.
So other thing that's really interesting is that if you look at people with a later stage kidney disease, you actually see that their tyrosine levels are a little bit higher. And we'll get to that in a minute. But you see that dopamine helps with modulating oxidative stress and inflammation. This neurotransmitter is kind of amazing because it's involved in a lot of different things. It kind of gets a bad rap or like kind of, it's like the fart joke. Like it gets like this joke all the time about like, oh, I need a dopamine hit. Oh, I eat chocolate because I need dopamine. Oh, I jump off I like to go bungee jumping because I like dopamine. So it gets kind of,
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a good or bad rap, but it's, it just kind of gets the joke around it all the time. And um it's because but it's involved with so many more things. So if you think about a kidney that is stressed or an organ that's stressed, and you're going to have oxidative stress, right? And you're also going to have inflammation in cases where there's been a decline, whether it's because of mold exposure, or pathogens, or stress, or lack of nutrients, or a cruddy diet, or microbiome, whatever, right? There's going to be oxidative stress. And if you need dopamine to modulate that oxidative stress and improve it, and you don't have enough, or you're rolling through it because you're super high stress, or you just don't convert it well, like me, that is going to cause potentially some kidney issues and is going to exacerbate the kidney issues down the road. And as the kidneys continue to decline, you start having more oxidative stress, but you also are now not going to like, yeah, you don't absorb tyrosine as well. So you kind of get in this really vicious cycle between like, you don't have enough tyrosine, but you need it, but now you're not converting to dopamine. You need the dopamine to help motivate or modulate the oxidative stress. And maybe you're using a lot of it to modulate oxidative stress. And so you can see how that would just get in like a vicious cycle of never enough for your body to catch up.
It's interesting too, because then back to what you were saying about the dopamine hit, it starts to make sense where if you become tyrosine deficient, you then will look for things outside of your environment or in your environment outside of you to try and get this dopamine hit artificially. So it's really fascinating. Hence why you look at the personality type when they come into clinic, which makes sense. So,
Yeah.
Okay, so people listening to this, and obviously it's hard to pull apart tyrosine and dopamine because it's so intrinsically linked. So when you're thinking, because one of the things that interventions that we often use when it comes to kidney disease is plant-based diets, which typically are lower protein, especially in stage kidney disease. We might be thinking about using keto analogs and doing low protein.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as we start to do that, we're going to have diets potentially, if people aren't working with renal dietitians or checking stuff, that are going to become low in tyrosine. So what is for people listening going, well, okay, I'm maybe in stage 5 and I'm trying to hold off dialysis. So I'm doing via very low protein diets, but I have this very typical dopamine personality that you are talking to. What do we do about that? Like, where is the fine line between making sure that you're supporting people's neurotransmitters, especially dopamine because of its antioxidant effect, potential blood pressure regulation, versus keeping protein at a level, especially if we've, say, got proteinuria and we're getting protein spillage? Like, where's the fine line with that? Or are you just doing it through keto analogs? Talk to me about that, because I think people would be wondering.
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so so there's plant-based diet, and then there's these low protein or very low protein diets. And we really need to segment them out because they're going to change. It changes a little bit what happens for people when they're getting L-tyrosine. So if you're just going plant-based, let's say if I have CKD, you've heard plant-based diets are awesome, which they are incredible for, CKD. The alkalinity is just amazing. So you move to plant-based diet, and most often when people move to plant-based diet, what ends up happening is they end up eating the holy diet. That's what I call it. The holy diet, which means that they've taken out meat, but they haven't been sure what to add in. And most people add in beans because that's familiar to them, but they won't add in a diverse number of other plant-based protein sources. That's where you could really become a very low tyrosine plant-based diet, because tyrosine is going to be found in soy, right? It's very rich in soy products. So like tempeh and tofu, and in American culture, those are not like part of our regular diet. And I will just say as a side note here, fake soy products don't count, right? Isolated soy protein doesn't count. So like real soy products are really, really very, very rich in tyrosine. So other things that they might put in, if they're being wise, they put in some nuts and seeds, pumpkin seeds, sesame seeds, peanuts, peanut butter. if they have some seeds in abundance, they're also going to get a good amount of tyrosine as well, which would be good. Um, but if they're just doing beans and vegetable, and that's kind of their plant-based diet, they're going, or I see a lot of times people go vegetarian, so they start doing a lot of dairy instead of meat. And so they're kind of doing dairy and veg. That's going to be very low in tyrosine. So that could be a potential problem for people. Plus, a plant-based diet can be quite low in B vitamins. It's something we see quite a bit is that the B vitamins are very low. So again, you have to have B6 and some iron to be able to convert dopamine down the dopamine pathway. So if you're following just a plant-based diet and it's very robust and you have a little bit of soy in there and peanut butter and some lentils and pumpkin seeds and sesame seeds, you may be able to still support a lot of those neurotransmitters just on enough, just by having enough tyrosine. I would still take a B complex with that. Now, if we're looking at these low protein or very low protein diets, one of the problems is that most of the rich sources of tyrosine are also rich sources of protein. So soy, lentils, peanut butters, almonds, cashews. So if you're doing a very low protein diet or a low protein diet, it's very, very vegetable heavy, which is great for alkalinity, but it's going to be very, very low in L-tyrosine. And if you're not supplementing in B6, and if you really need that to help your neurotransmitters, I've had some patients move to plant-based diet and they really, really struggle with cravings. They struggle with mental health issues. Like they don't feel good low protein without having some sort of amino acid support because they need it. Like they need the L-tyrosine and they need that little bit of extra nutrient. So I think you have to look at it from those angles. And if you don't feel good, like you're noticing like, whoa, like I tend to be a little bit more depressed or I tend to, be struggling with my mental health on this plant-based diet. Sometimes people blame it on their kidney disease. They say, oh, it's just because I have kidney disease and I'm struggling with, feeling happy and depression and things. But sometimes it's not the kidney disease at all. It's nutrients. And you have to look at either using a keto analog or, building the protein up just a little bit with other supportive factors so that you'll be able to maintain your overall health, including your mental health.
Yeah, such a good point. It comes back to what we say all the time is just the importance of working with someone like you or someone from K&I or Kidney Coach, just having someone check that sort of stuff. Are there tests that people can do to check their L-tyrosine levels, dopamine, to know what they're all sitting at? And what would you be using in clinical practice, apart from obviously the clinical picture of the personality of the person, to maybe check to see if these tyrosine, L-tyrosine to dopamine pathways are working efficiently?
That's a good question. So you, of course, can do nutrigenomics. So we use 3x4, LifeCode. Those are two good labs that we use. And then once I see like, oh, you might be like struggle in these pathways, then sometimes it's enough information for me to say, hey, let's just try a couple supplements. You really notice pretty quick, like within a month, if or less, like 2 weeks, if these are problems for you and if supplementing is going to help you. So that can be a very quick intervention. Otherwise you can do a micronutrient test. Things like NutriEval will pull in a lot of different markers that can link back to neurotransmitters as well. And those are ones that we would use too. We don't often test the specific neurotransmitters, to tell you the truth, because we're looking at all the cofactors and what would be tying into them. But you could, I mean, there's definitely tests out there for it.
Yeah. I mean, the organic acid test generally, I mean, part of
we get that in the NutriEval. You get your organic acid. It's a little bit skewed if your GFR is less than 30. So you have to take this into account with some of the functional tests. If your GFR is lower, like it may be reflective of, like, if your kidneys aren't functioning well, then you're definitely going to have some things that are going to run at higher levels because they're not excreted as efficiently. And
Yeah,
he's like, are you high, low? It's hard to say.
yeah. I think your NutriVal is very similar to what I use in Australia, which is a NutriStat, but that does do all the amino acids. So you do get a full breakdown of all the amino acid pathways. Yes, you're right. In kidney disease, it's always skewed. So you have to keep that in mind. Okay. Is there any times where you would not use L-tyrosine, as you know, there's signs where you're like, no, I don't want to use L-tyrosine in this patient. I don't want to supplement it. I wouldn't think about it because it might actually cause more issues?
I think for me, I become cautious of using higher dose amino acids if I am guessing that they have some uremia or their gut is really disrupted. Because again, L-tyrosine does turn into paracresol, which is a uremic toxin from the gut. So I don't want to compound that issue. Probably first I would nurture the gut, and maybe I would pulse the L-tyrosine or just do like a 5-day like run of it and see if it made a difference for that patient, just because then I would know I was hitting the target correctly. But I would tend to heal the gut first, or I would be combining it with a probiotic like Renadil that's specifically targeting uremic toxins. But I would approach that very carefully if I assumed there was a high level uremia in using a lot of amino acid, like heavy dose amino acids like L-tyrosine. Otherwise, I, I don't feel like for most people that doing a 2 or 3 week run of it to see if it's going to help them. Again, like you don't want to just do it because you have CKD. You need to do it with an indication of what you think is going to improve. But a 2 or 3 week run of L-tyrosine with a good B complex would probably give me the information I need to know as a clinician. And for the patient, is this going to help you, or is it not really the right problem? Like, are we working on the wrong area?
Yeah. And just to clarify for people, I know you've said it a few times, B6, just walk me through just so people can hear it. You absolutely need B6 for the conversion of tyrosine into dopamine. So just walk people through that so they understand that maybe using L-tyrosine in isolation actually may
Oh,
not be
yes.
the answer that
Yeah,
people need.
so most nutrients need cofactors to convert into, I'd say, a usable form, right? So it's kind of like uh, I like to compare it to if you happen to grow wheat. In order to use that wheat for something usable, you're gonna have to grind it up and like put it in a form which is flour, so you could bake with it or whatever. Right. So our body to make things in a usable form, they need cofactors because that helps like take it from this biochemical structure to this biochemical structure, and this biochemical structure we can use, and it's gonna, work with our cells. So for dopamine, and dopamine has quite a long pathway of utilization, but again and again, you see in the dopamine pathway is as a tyrosine being converted into the different components of dopamine, that B6 is really necessary to make the wheel turn,
Yeah.
from like tyrosine into L-dopa. You have to have B6. It's like the crank that turns the wheel. And if you don't have it, you can have all the tyrosine out front, and the crank's not going to turn, and you're not going to actually get what the right form. So these cofactors are just really, really important, which is why you can never, pretty much ever, think about a nutrient in isolation. You have to think about all the cofactors because that's where you end up taking a lot of supplements that don't really help you because you'll have all the cofactors.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. I think it's such an important thing because a lot of
Yeah.
people do get individually nutrient focused. And of course, I know we've been doing them in a series for the YouTube channel, but yeah, it's really important that people understand that we're not ever talking about, we might talk about it in isolation to give you information, but we're generally never prescribing amino acids and supplements in isolation in general for exactly the reason that you just spoke about.
Yeah.
Okay, Jessianna, what else do people, before we wrap this up, need to know about L-tyrosine and kidney disease? Have we missed anything?
Um, I don't think so, but I would say that where this is most relevant, again, as a recap, if you feel like dopamine is part of your story, and you probably know if it is, um, that and you're struggling with your blood pressure, it might be worth a consult to see if doing some strategies to particularly target your neurotransmitters, not just your CKD, helps with your blood pressure. That's your CKD. So I think that's where it would be really, really relevant. And for other people where you want to kind of dig in a little bit deeper, looking at your nutrigenomics, which then ties back into these nutrients, B6, L-tyrosine, back into the amino acids that are particular for you, that can be really such a game changer for people and really helping them understand what might be helpful for them.
Yeah, such a great thing. And it's, it's such a great, interesting topic, L-tyrosine, because it's not one, like Sam was thinking about it in Parkinson's, it's not one, and I didn't even realize that there were dopamine receptors inside the kidneys, which I just find fascinating, and no wonder you ended up down a rabbit hole.
Right? It's so cool.
So cool. Like, the human body's just amazing, really, when you think about it. So, Jessianna, as always, thank you so much for your wisdom and for wanting to go down the rabbit holes every time I go, let's talk about this. And you're always over and above the challenge. If anyone out there is listening and they are interested in this and really want that one-on-one care where you're going to work with a team of renal dietitians that are going to treat you as a person, not disease, and not just give you a low sodium and phosphorus and potassium diet, then Jessianna and the team at kidneynutritionalinstitute.org are the people to talk to. They've got a lot of great free resources on their website as well. I'll put in a link below and you can have a look at what they do. Got telehealth, so they can reach out to you and work with you anywhere in the US and anywhere in the world. And if you've got insurance, then you can do it that way as well. If you want to know more about what we do, head to www.kidneycoach.com. You'll find us on social media, on Instagram and Facebook under the same handle. And make sure you hit subscribe and like. That way you'll get notified anytime we put up more information. And stay tuned. Jessianna and I will be back in a couple of weeks or so to go down the rabbit hole of, I can't even remember what amino acid we've got next, but I know it's in the schedule there somewhere, Jess. So we will be digging into we'll be digging into the next amino acid on our list. Thank you again, Jessianna. You're always a wealth of wisdom. And for everyone listening, thank you for being part of our community. We look forward to seeing you next time.